Welcome back to our series on life in abundance as proclaimed by Universal Christ. I left off last time by saying that I think we need something of a paradigm shift in the way that we articulate our faith. It seems to me that there needs to be a new and more dynamic language by which we acknowledge the divine. You know, when I was going through my seminary formation more than 50 years ago, Catholic theology was still underpinned by philosophical categories which date all the way back to Plato and Aristotle, and given a Christian context by Thomas Aquinas. God was referred to as the uncaused cause or the unmoved mover. Even the theology of the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist was couched in the term transubstantiation, based on the distinction that Thomas made between the substantial essence of something as distinct from its accidental outward qualities. Even as far back as the Council of Chalcedon in the 4th century, the Church was struggling to articulate a creed that spoke a triune God. According to the longer Athanasian wording, Christ was seen as being consubstantial with the Father. I'm not exactly sure if that's very helpful to a lot of Christians today. Now, this is not to deny the efficacy of those categories of human thought which attempted to articulate the divine mystery. However, we live in an age in which artificial intelligence, AI, and quantum mechanics and physics have become expressions of our experience of reality. The age of medieval scholasticism can no longer provide the framework for our contemporary understanding of the universe and how it works. Nor can it provide for a suitable basis on which can be built a spirituality for those of us seeking to know a more dynamic creator. As an example of this, let's look at the dogma of the Blessed Trinity. It was often taught a la St. Patrick with the use of a 3-petal shamrock, and then we were told it was a mystery that we couldn't understand anyway. The focus always seemed to be on the persons of the Trinity rather than their relationship. And furthermore, we never understood what the doctrine of the Trinity had to do with us and our lives. Saint Bonaventure, a Franciscan theologian, had a more dynamic view of the Trinity. He compared it to a water wheel by a stream. The wheel had 3 buckets, one that scooped up the water, one that carried it, and one that emptied out the water. And the wheel was always in constant motion because of these 3 actions. It was not only the way that God works, but it also represented the way we also must work in learning, sharing, and emptying ourselves and serving others. So, where do we look to find a language that speaks to this kind of dynamic spirituality? I think we find it in 2 places, 2 sources. One is as old as the Bible itself, and the other is as new as the latest findings of science. Pope Francis was kind of nudging us in this direction through his encyclical Laudato Si. It was the very first papal encyclical ever written about our environment. It spoke about the complexities of both the macro and the micro universe and how interconnected it is. There's a basic unifying element which is necessary for anything to survive. Death, in the case of the human body, for example, occurs when the different organs cease to work in conjunction with each other. New life occurs when something is able to be transformed by giving up its present life, as Jesus mentioned in his parable about the grain of wheat. Now, modern science seems to concur. The only thing that doesn't change in our experience of life is, in fact, change itself. The universe is always evolving. We are evolving. Christianity is evolving. In the world of hockey, people said of Wayne Gretzky, the great one, that the thing that made him a great player was not so much knowing where the puck was, but rather where it was going to be. Perhaps maybe there's a lesson in that for Christianity. It has placed so much effort and energy in convincing others of Jesus' divinity rather than the message that he was pointing to. Have we placed our emphasis on worshiping Christ or following him? We might smile when a small child looks at a pointed finger rather than the object to which that finger is directed. And what Christ points us to is the message of what every human heart longs for. That is, to love and to be loved. It's a universal message which every human being yearns for, no matter what gender, race, culture, religion, or non-religion they might belong to. So how can that message be conveyed? Again, we have to refer back to a biblical approach. Storytelling. It's the primary way in which Jesus taught. Stories grip the heart in a manner which codified laws do not. Stories involve people and respects their decisions in freely choosing real life-giving pathways. Codified laws, on the other hand, are often given to induce fear and invoke control. When they alone are used in order to evangelize, people may be coerced, but they will not be truly converted. Unfortunately, as the church became more institutionalized, it leaned more towards the latter way of proclaiming the gospel. Jesus told stories that captivated people. The church oftentimes, on the other hand, produced catechisms which involved memorization and resulted in boredom. Now, some may argue that storytelling and moral suasion are too wishy-washy. But when we refer back to Jesus' approach, his teachings weren't always of the soft and fuzzy variety. In fact, they were always challenging and posed profound lessons about life and how to live it well. The alternate wisdom which Jesus presents is that in which the religious life is a deepening relationship with the Spirit of God, and not that of a life of requirement and reward. I recall when I was in high school, the most boring class was the survey course on world history. It was comprised of memorizing dates and learning names in order to pass an exam. And it wasn't until later, when I started reading the detailed stories of historical events and people, that I became interested. I could even place myself within those narratives. I recall that when the new rite of Christian initiation of adults, RCIA, was introduced after Vatican II, There was an emphasis on faith sharing, especially between the sponsor and the candidate. There was plenty of storytelling, and over a period of time, kinship was evolved with the candidate and the church community. But sadly, in many cases, the RCIA devolved into a class, like a survey course in world history. Information was conveyed about the Catholic faith, but I'm not sure if conversion and relationship building really occurred. The science of quantum mechanics and physics tells us that energy drives the universe. Even what we call matter is not static, but is composed of energy waves. Thus, the entire cosmos is in movement, and in movement, there is life. Many Christians cite John 3:16 as the core of the gospel message. God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him will not perish, but may have eternal life. Perhaps John 10:10 deserves equal billing. I have come that you may have life and have it more abundantly. I'm not saying that we throw out all former ways of articulating faith or who God is. There is still much ancient wisdom that can be helpful in bringing some people to a deeper faith. And thus, we keep old wine in old wineskins. However, the new wine of the 21st century requires the new wines of addressing the needs of an evolving humanity in an evolving universe. And perhaps that involves a wider and more universal approach, beginning with a better understanding of a universal Christ. We'll talk more about that in our next segment.